bigger claps, guys. Come on. You guys don't have any energy. Can I hear a bigger clap? 1, 2, 3, like bigger one. Okay. 3 claps, big one. No, hold on, what? 3 claps, big one. And then 3 1, this one. Thank you, thanks a lot.
Thank you, AJ. Yes, 7 years. I have a small anecdote for you, because I know you've been very busy in the Ruby stuff for years. I once took my son for a trip to Devopsdays, Australia. When we came back, he was said, okay, it was a 4-day trip, and he came back to me and said, Dad, can I have a book about Ruby? Okay, what do you do? He was 12 years old. I gave him a book about Ruby. And the next morning at breakfast, he said, Dad, I really have to ask you a question. What's your favorite editor? So he finally got it, like after just reading the one book, How We Think in Our Industry. Okay, probably not the best example, but now he's studying IT, so I don't know what's going to happen with him. Who recognizes this picture? A few. So this picture was pretty much the start of DevOps as such. It was done in a presentation by John Alspaugh in 2008 or 2009 at Velocity conference. And they said they had such good results having developers and operations working together. Let's see. Clickety-click. Okay. So notice there the world of IT in 2010. Gone. Okay. We had the people from infrastructure sitting on their island, the testers somewhere in between, the developers here, and there was this kind of tiny little route of going through. Who's still having that kind of organization today? Raise your hand. One brave soul who admits it. 2 more. Come on. Who still has that organization? Okay, 1 more. So I hope the others really have solved the problem of the delivery. Notice there are still many parts over the years that we're still discovering. For a while, there has been a spark in network ops, and then it died again. It's coming back again. Storage kind of all of a sudden rose. The database is still kind of like, ooh, we can go faster, but the data? I don't know if we can go faster there. But over the years, I guess this bridge got better and better and better. And even up to a level where we kind of got integrated with project management, and more. But still, when you ask one person what is DevOps, he will tell you something else. He will say, well, it's Docker, 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 Docker. The other one will say it's about the culture, working together. The other person who comes from an IT background, basically it's service management, of course. And for good and for bad, I never wanted to give a definition, which caused a lot of confusion, and everybody tried to pin down their own. But the good part is that everybody had to think their own definition. On hindsight, it might have not been the best thing. I'm still not sure about it. But the nice thing of it is that it's something that we kept on evolving in the organization, how we see things happen. Over the years, I made this little model, And I think the acronym, who's familiar with CAMS? Raise your hand. Okay, a few. So this was pretty much the summary of early DevOps days. So it had the culture part, automation, measure, and share. I believe after 10 years, people are kind of forgetting the culture and the share, and they go automate and measure. To be honest, if I look at the schedule of this DevOps days, it's about automate and measure. It's way less about the two others. But I'm a believer, you're here, and you're sharing, hopefully, your knowledge, so that's good. And the culture, that's up to you. It's not something we can organize for you, but it is basically when the initial DevOps and, let's say, DevOps started with the first DevOps days. We didn't even know there was a thing called DevOps, but it kind of got from there. And it was pretty much this part between Dev and Ops not collaborating. And it wasn't really that much about the tooling. We have improved the tooling, but it was pretty much about sitting and understanding each other part. Again, if you have solved all the silos and you're sitting together, I hope for you, you're actually sharing that part. When companies start implementing DevOps in the beginning, the first thing they focus on is extending the delivery from dev to ops. You know, building the pipeline, making faster, going faster, and so on. So automation, but to make the automation succeed, you have to overcome the structural problems within your company. You have to overcome the collaboration, maybe other things like operations is valued by uptime and the devs are valued by features. So aligning these two, that's not a technology thing. It's more of a structural organizational thing. So it's really important that it isn't just putting the CI pipeline together. And then once we go into faster into ops, we want to get all the feedback from production. And I'm not saying the server is up and the server is down. You know, that's interesting, but not to the business. It's more like, hey, we've deployed the software. Is it bringing value? Can I put those metrics on there? And you can say, well, I can log all the requests, but are you logging the feedback from the users that they're complaining about the service? That's totally something different. So capturing that knowledge back to the project. So this feedback loop is what we've been discussing most of the years in Devopsdays conferences and so on. And then once you mature this cycle, you start to not just be on the end of the spectrum and just read the receiving and making it faster to receive. You're embedding the knowledge earlier in the value chain so that you're not hitting the defect or the issue or whatever you do at the end, but you're having it at the beginning. It saves you cost and effort because it's not yet in production. So tooling the process around it, and this is typically something of a structural change inside of the company you're doing. Because we're almost 10 years of DevOps, I thought it was useful to kind of explain a little bit of the growth. So I was, by accident, people give me credit for that, but I organized the first DevOps days in Ghent. And, you know, a lot of sharing was happening. We have the DevOps Cafe, the podcast. that started sharing all the IDs. The idea of CAMs that we just explained came about. There was a book coming out, but there were also some negative voices saying DevOps is a scam. And, you know, when you are very focused and having a supporter or something, one thing that's really hard is to also see how it could be negative. And there has been some kind of fundamentalism in DevOps saying, well, this is the way we need to do it, which is interesting because we want to be more agile, we want to have less structure, and then we start saying, well, you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that. You have to, you have to. So we start putting structure back that we hate, and all of a sudden, what we do is put the structure back. So yes, and it is myopic, because people were starting to focus on the dev and ops part only, and only that, only the build pipeline. But it's much more than just that. Then somebody, and that was still 2012, said, operations is going away, no ops. Interestingly enough, that same word re-emerged when Amazon launched Lambda, just saying, you know, operations is going away. I had the privilege of being the speaker after the main announcement of Amazon Lambda, where the first speaker was saying, it's the end of DevOps, and so on. And then it was me. I'll come back to that later. Obviously, a lot of technology on monitoring, infrastructure management, but also some things on damming and collaboration happened. And then there was a trademark attempt. Somebody actually tried to trademark DevOps. It was in the US, done by, I think, a person from Austria. You can find that online, the application and all the objections. And the reason why they couldn't claim it was not about the automation, not about the measurement, but the fact that you have shared all the knowledge before, and the court ruled and said, well, you cannot claim it because it's community property, because it's already widespread, so you cannot claim it. I found that interesting because, you know, people looked at me because I was there from the beginning. It's like, oh, you have to go against all that. No. If the ID cannot survive on its own, why put all the effort in there? But luckily, like AJ said, like all the Devopsdays, all the community just kept on growing and growing. Even early days, Rugged DevOps, which was kind of the predecessor for DevSecOps, which is kind of building up as a momentum last year and this year. And all of a sudden, even during the Obama campaign, they said, oh, we're using DevOps to make the scale. So it really went mainstream, and I think this was around, this map around ends 2013. So still 5 more years to go, but I guess these 5 years you pretty much know. The full stack engineer emerged. We started hearing about AI ops. So all these kind of tractions grew from that part. I'm not saying that's not really true. There is a relationship. You can never say the ID only grew from this part, but at least having no definition allowed this to expand, and like the elephant picture, everybody brought their own stuff to the table. But when I look at the companies today, they say, well, we've built a pipeline, done, check. It's really interesting that where we worked so hard about people collaborating and sitting together, that we're getting to reduced that we are the DevOps that build and manage the pipeline. And for me, that's pretty sad after so many years. But the other thing I learned is that looking at from a distance DevOps, there was this force of techno-optimism in the industry. Because we had all these cool tools and all this new stuff emerging, people were kind of, yeah, we'll do DevOps, but the culture will push it away. Just give us the new tool. And it's something that if we as an industry cannot keep that urgency under control, I think whatever cultural revolution or whatever change we want to put in your organization will just fall flat after a couple of years. So if we really want to have a lesson learned on that, it's something that we need to be aware of. So for me, this tweet kind of sums it up. The foolishness for tools. And I see a lot of blanks to me like, hey, yeah, give us a new tool and continue. But this urge of always building and getting a new tool, even though your problem is still the same and could have been easily solved by the previous one, why are we doing this? And I know one reason, because over the years, it's something called like resume-driven development. Like, I want to be cool kid on the block, and I want to have the latest tools on my list. And if I'm not on the latest tools, my hiring or my career is probably going to have a problem. But the thing is, after 7 tools, it will only take you a fraction to learn whatever new tool they're using in that company, but you're bringing so much more if you've explored other tools that they aren't using. So this is something that's obviously for engineers and people in tech is very much something that, I don't know, somehow we need to fix it. I don't know how, but I want you all to be aware of this, that this is something we do to ourselves as an industry. I had a chat with somebody right before the talk, and what do you think the impact of Docker was on DevOps? And frankly, I don't think it was a lot on a cultural part. And it was a very negative one on reducing DevOps to just the tooling and containers and that part. Obviously, this has been a double-edged sword. Like the early adopters and the early companies were technology companies trying to promote configuration as management, trying to promote monitoring. So just like Agile had TDD on the technology side and continuous integration as the kind of enabler for part of the cultural revolution. I could not imagine after 10 years, but they exist. The DevOps fanboys. They go to all meetups. They use all the tools that are available. I'm excited that they're excited, but I'm less excited about their fundamentalism. We're DevOps, ITIL is dead. Really? Because people are doing that now already. They say, SRE, DevOps is dead. So you are building on the shoulders of giants on every new idea, but together with this toolishness, this kind of dismissing anything old is bad, it is also very much ingrained in people today in our tech industry. And I don't really, well, I know again why, because if I'm using the new tools and I say the other one, I get the chance to use the new tool and kind of go from there. But it's nice to be excited, but it's not good to say all the rest is bad. There might be a reason. And I recently heard the word lagom. It's a Swedish word. Not too much, not too little, just right. I've seen many build pipelines for building it for the sake of the build pipeline and keep improving it for the sake of the build pipeline. Where they could have stopped months ago with the integration, but all of a sudden it became a goal on itself to build the pipeline, to improve the pipeline, to work on the pipeline. And people who maybe know my blog, it's so I blog at the site called Jedi.be, and Jedi is just enough developed infrastructure. So not overdo it. Yes, you can shave 2 milliseconds, but guess what? It's irrelevant in a business perspective. Unless that 2 milliseconds is multiplied by 10,000 or 100,000, but just make sure that you find the right balance and just not for the sake of doing things. A couple of weeks ago, there was this interesting tweet with a map. Not now for the IT landscape, but more of the ID spectrum. They put like DevOps here, and there is so much other IDs going around. Yeah, you know, we know the Scrum, the CI/CD. We have things like design ops, lean startup, and so on. So we just live in a tiny ecosystem called DevOps, but the world is much bigger than that. And if we want to keep on making the difference, we have to reach out and not just think DevOps as something for Dev and Ops only. The name took birth because the pain in the companies was most felt between Dev and Ops. But nowadays, when the pipeline's kind of working and the people are already sitting together and collaborating, it might move somewhere else in your company. So the bottleneck might move to your HR department. How do we hire people? And I take this with a grain of salt because you're not hiring a DevOps person, obviously, but people with the mindset of DevOps. People have been experimenting with things like internships from other companies. So not just like the apprentice coming into your company, but mixing people from other companies and inspiring them for knowledge, or inviting them over for a week and see if they fit inside the team and that they're actually collaborating and not just sitting somewhere in a corner. So they had to change the hiring process. Instead of having a bullet list asking for, do you know technology A, B, or C? Can you type this command and so on? So they had to evolve too. Another part of the global company started becoming more agile. So the whole planning of budgets for a year was put under pressure. Just like the waterfall mechanism in software development, the same happening in finance. So the book Beyond Budgeting is actually saying, well, how can we make a plan 1 year ahead of time for a budget? We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the market. So all that is, again, emerging agility in another part of the company. And if you look at the principles, if you make a little bit of translation, not a central plan, okay? Don't restrict and control it. So that same principles apply to another domain inside the same company, but maybe they're the bottleneck because they haven't planned ahead, or they're very rigid and they lost market share because it was foreseen that way. The last couple of years, I could have gone easily inside the IT industry and joined a company to build technology. And I forced myself saying, well, you know, that's all too interesting, but what I really want to learn is how do you run a company? Because it's also nice to say, you know, these CX levels coming up to me, oh, what do we need to do? It's like, how do I know? I've never run a company, but you know, I can build you a pipeline, but I don't think that's probably enough for you. So I started with this company, and even though it's very small, we're 7 people, I feel all the pain points, and guess what? It isn't DevOps. It isn't automating that, because we got that all covered. We get all the logging, all the monitoring, all that stuff. We can build anything they like, but are we building the right thing? That was the most important question in our company, because you know, you're a startup and you want to get that feedback. And then we get into debates like marketing and sales. They say, well, you know, we cannot solve the product because you don't have feature A, B, C. And from the tech side, we said, well, if you get somebody to pay for that feature, we can build it. So you see, this tension is not only between dev and ops, but maybe in other parts that you're integrating with. And the nice thing of this book, The Machine, it has nothing to do with the machine, I'm sorry, but it's just what the author did in the book, is trying to structure the pipeline of leads coming in and then taking it to eventually engineering the operational side with customer service. So he said, this is a complete pipeline from selling it to delivering it and back, because the customer service is, again, giving the feedback. So this is just to give you an idea that the pipeline we're building in the broadest sense of DevOps was only the beginning of the bridge between that part. There's way more bridges to be done across other parts in the company. Again, at the startup, 1 week before this conference, I sent an email to the organizers. I'm not sure if I can make it. And I felt sorry that I had to send that mail. It was because one of my colleagues got a burnout. We just had a major launch, and luckily enough, it were early signs of burnout, so we sent him home. But still, it made me rethink that even if you think about all the factories in the world and all the automation and the engines that we did, why can't we work less? Why are we putting ourselves to so much stress? Even if we automate everything, the balance between work and life is becoming one of the biggest bottlenecks in our company. And this has nothing to do per se with the technology, although technology like chat and all those kind of asynchronous forms and being online all the time and be able to work all the time are not really helping us. Of course, the company will say, well, you're flexible now. Sure, until you're home sick, you're not that flexible. So it is another thing that I think as an industry we need to solve. Is that DevOps? not per se. But if you think about DevOps as finding the bottleneck that we want to solve to make sure our company is delivering, yes, this is increasingly happening. Simon Wardley has this interesting technique called mapping, Swordley maps, if you look at it online. And one of the things he has about if things get commodity, you know, it's like electricity. Nobody really cares about it. And what he was saying in this part is that, well, because the cloud is now becoming commodity and the operating system and everything with servers is commodity, DevOps is actually becoming legacy. With technologies like serverless, you know, what are you managing? There's no servers. The tuning is done by somebody else. And, you know, sure, you're still delivering maybe the application, but we are evolving in the role of ops and what we're doing. And we were early adopter for serverless, and still 3 to 4 years later, even though we have a high volume, 1 minute peak, we can still not use serverless due to limitations underneath on the server within Amazon. But serverless is not that much about running that one function and then going down. In our company, we did not build our monitoring system ourselves. We did not build our logging system ourselves. We do not manage the servers ourselves. We use services like image generation. We don't do that, build that ourselves. So increasingly, we're using services. So I think the real trend, what serverless is trying to teach us, is that it's service-full. And what's a little bit scary about using other person's services is that whatever your bottleneck is, you cannot tune it anymore because it's on the other side. So we're back at square one, where we can't communicate with the other part. And how do we go from there? There is a whole talk from me on this part, but the important part of the talk is that we are still communicating, even if it's people outside our company. For those who remember one of the first big outage from Amazon, the one lesson they learned: make a web page that described what was happening. So the first lesson they learned was not about technology, but it was about communication. They started off writing postmortems. They started off having conferences where people can ask people. They opened this Amazon lofts where people could go talk to people from Amazon. So even though it's not technology that you manage, it's still important that you get to learn the other part. Whatever service you're using, whether it's your CI system, I learned a lot from going to conferences, meeting engineers from that company, understanding what's under the hood, so to know what's really going on, what's the best use case, and whether I should use that service or not. So all that communication is important. For those who were using Travis CI for a long time, they had this chat where you can jump on and have direct access to engineers. Instead of logging a ticket and so on. That's just examples of communication again. It's not a technology thing. And it is just changing. This one is one of the lesser known books on DevOps. And it's a very humorous take on who knows what the actual business value is we're producing. I find myself in, we use Trello for or features and so on, and just shuffling those with the right priority. And then if somebody says, well, I would say, oh, I think this is a priority. It's going to take me 12 days. I don't think it's a priority anymore. It's strange, right? Why is it all of a sudden not a priority anymore? Because I'm weighing the balance between 6 days of effort and the value I get from that feature. But if it would take 1 day, I would give it a different balance and say, okay, let's do this. So this is how you balance things. And the smaller we make the features, interestingly enough, the harder it is to see the value of that one little function. So you need to really have a step back on the global view, what you're doing, to understand the value. This book even goes further and says, like, we've given people authority over their technology stack. But increasingly, this book would say, well, we got to give them authority over their financials, over their hiring pool. Sure, we'll put some guidelines in place, not rules per se, but guidelines. And then if they follow the guidelines, they have this autonomy. And all of a sudden, what you see is that people start asking, why are we doing this? That's the right question. It's not how we're doing this. Like, why are we doing this? Is this bringing value? And one of the other lessons I learned is that there is a difference between customer value and business value. You think about all the features that are cool and that the customer wants, customer value. You think about what brings in the money, business value. And it's a different thing. And it's really hard to know. And we used to, within Scrum, we have this one product owner where we say, you know what best for the business. You tell us. But it doesn't work that anymore. Like, he knows a part, somebody else knows a part. And what can we do? Experiment, adopt. Because it isn't that much of a big plan anymore. A couple of months ago, I had this customer I was working with. Yeah, you can ask that to the Agile team for something to do. But you'll have to wait 2 weeks before it gets on their sprint. It didn't feel so agile to me. So it's again, we're putting these structures in place as of things we know, but sometimes we have to do away with them, because if something's urgent, we have to have that way. It's what Kanban had by having the silver bullet, just go through the board as something important, and not the rigidness from, like the mantra, well, you cannot disturb the Agile team for 2 weeks while they're in the sprint. Sure, it's a balance. So, for me, if I would say then, for lack of a better name, DevOps Plus, is just looking in your company, where's the next bottleneck? And it might not be anymore in your development part, but it might be in some of the other parts, and start working with those things as well. So I tweeted this out yesterday, and I think for good and for worse, and I hate to break it to you if you were so enthusiastic about DevOps, I think DevOps is dead in a way that it has crystallized in the minds of people what it is. It's the build, it's the delivery, and so on. But I think now we can move on to the next thing. And it's maybe not DevOps, but if you think about DevOps as finding the next bottleneck, because we're working inside a system, then you can still call it DevOps. So it depends on how you frame the things. You can find several of the books I've mentioned in my talk. I want to thank all the organizers here for helping me share this story to you, and I look forward to hearing your story. And I think we still have some time left for questions, and that was my talk. Any questions? I will stay for 2 days, so you can always reach out to me if you want to.
Does work. Okay. Anybody, if they have questions, we can come and pass the mics to them. Yeah.
Hi, Patrick. So my question is, why do you think business value is different than customer value? Because, from what I understand, when there's something that customer values, he's more ready to pay for it, right? So that increases the business value for that feature or anything. So why do you think it's different?
Well, I think you have Christmas here, you have Santa Claus, right?
Yeah.
So as a child, you will write, I want this, I want that. And as a parent, you think, oh, that costs so much, I can never do this. So the first thing I would say, it's the customer wants something, but to build it, to make it efficient so that he accepts the cost is a different thing. And I might be able to build it, but as a company, is it in balance between what he's willing to pay for it or not? Just as in my example, am I willing to spend 6 days on this feature or only 1 based on the value? And I think a lot of people just say, well, it's a cool feature and people will go for it. But if you cannot sell it to them or sell it to multiple people, yeah. So how do you organize your business? Obviously, if you have the right sweet spot of a feature everybody's willing to pay a lot of money for, and you can organize it, or we have many people paying it for. But very often, this happens that this is one feature. Yeah, but he wants it. Yeah, but you will have to spend like a month to build it. We can only sell it twice. It will be good for that customer, but it's not economically feasible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hey, Godfather. The question is about the roles emerging, right? DevOps engineer, DevOps manager, DevOps. I feel it's things are going wrong. I mean, what is your comment on that?
So the term DevOps, if you would hear the DevOps choir from the fanboys, they will say, you should not have a separate DevOps team. You will not have a DevOps engineer, and so on. But my take on it is, if it changes fundamentally part of the structure by having that title or by having that group, it's not a bad thing. Like in the early Agile implementations, you had the Agile team. But it was more because they were the first to have that label, to have that change embedded inside the company. But if people call their delivery team the DevOps team, and they don't seek any contact with other parts of the company, and they just focused on, let's optimize this container, let's make sure the load balancer works, and so on. I would personally not use that label, but saying this is wrong, I come back to the elephant. It can mean many things to many people. So, okay.
So I have one. I have one question. You said that DevOps is dead, and I'm hurt.
Sorry.
One thing which I want to ask is two things you have mentioned. You said that putting the structure in DevOps. So DevOps was like a fluid idea, and we are trying to put structure in it. I think that's why you're saying that it's something which we are making it dead. Is it something which can be fixed? And second thing you talked about that I think we should go beyond DevOps. So what is that beyond you're mentioning? You're thinking about in this industry people who have done that thing and going too much into DevOps and start putting structure in there. How they can fix it? Is it something can be fixable or it's not, and we have to think something beyond?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is putting structure into something a bad thing? It is not. But it's a bad thing if it hinders you to do the next thing. So let's say you've built your pipeline and you have a certain way of doing it, and then a new project comes along and uses a whole different stack. No, you have to use this way. You have to do this. But, we don't have the tooling yet, but, this is something we need to do. So be prepared to make the exceptions. So that's part of the agility, is to adapt the rules, and not because you had the rules, but to adapt them when you need it. If you would take the other approach, I don't know, there is this kind of, I guess, urban legend about having people put dogs into microwaves, and then they put it into the manual, so it is forbidden to put dogs into the microwave. But the fact that, you're putting all these rules because of the one thing that happened, and it will slow you down. It's the same thing as when you're building software. There's this thing about every feature you add, you have to remove one. So it's the same thing with your structure. If you want to keep the fluidity, then you have to reevaluate that all the time. But some would say bureaucracy is actually the best and most efficient way because everything's fixed. But what they seem to forget is that if things change around you or in the industry, you will have to adapt the rules. I don't know if that kind of answers your question. Okay.
From where I come, usually people who do the work, right, the engineers and people, they understand that DevOps is more of a communication problem, a collaboration issue. Management don't really see it as that way. So how do we think we should approach that, communication?
Why do you think they see it that way?
Sorry?
Why do you think management doesn't see it that way?
For them, it's more of a tooling problem, like you said, toolishness. Or, the fact that, they have to lose command and control system, they have to let go, makes them a little bit worried or something.
Okay. So I would argue that we probably, as an IT partner, did that to ourselves by putting too much stress on the tooling, so management looks at it from a distance. It's all about the tooling. But what's interesting, if you go to things like the DevOps Enterprise Summit, the management people would say, well, they don't know how to communicate, these technical people. So it goes in both ways, and you think if your management doesn't understand, well, that could be wrong, or it could be wrong perception. But in many cases, they do understand, but they feel that on a daily basis, you fall back to, we built this tool, we built that tool. So it's a perception thing. If you would talk to them a lot, they might change their mind too. Okay?
This is towards the cultural part, the DevOps culture part. I'm a DevOps consultant, so I give for services through giving more values to the customer, and if you adopt DevOps, how it works. The thing is, I see some fear in the people where they talk about DevOps, adopting it from the cultural point. The reason is their boss might be the dev side, and the ops part, it goes to the ops side. So do you see that reorg is the first step to adopt the cultural adoption?
Yes. So if you want to change something you've been doing a certain way, it does require you to change the structure. It will probably not help that you alone change yourself and the others will not follow. But sometimes there's a good reason for it. I would not just simply say, well, they don't do it, so they're not very smart. I would try to understand why they are not doing it. What are their objections? And it could be, like you're saying, well, I'm a dev manager, and if I need to collaborate with somebody else, that's really hard because I'm used to having my own budget. I used to have my own control. I'm not saying this will work all the time, but it has happened many times to me where I was the man in the middle, and I always try to get them both inside the room together and have that discussion, and not go with him and then there. I'm not saying it always works. There is always the option of leaving, but that's a bit drastic. But what I try to do myself is that at least I try to get the conversation going a couple of times. I do my best, and then if this is not working out, then I draw my conclusions. But getting them in together inside the same room. I will tell you an anecdote. Do you know Forrester, like the analysts? I had exact this discussion with the two people responsible inside Forrester, the development person, the operational person, and I was on call with them and said, well, you know what, actually we don't collaborate that well together. But so those were the industry people who had to advise you on DevOps. But what I found is that if it's it could be very well one of those bottlenecks that's beyond your control. And that makes it really scary. And then you can try to somehow expand your, I don't mean control in a bad way, but kind of open up the field in a certain way. Maybe say, let's do a project together with both of them, and you report to them and give them good feedback in a way that it's an example project, and you try to think for them like, what's a win for him, what's a win for him, and then you would start up building confidence. But that's not really specific to DevOps, that's just introducing changes inside anything. But it's getting, the first hurdle is obviously aligning their incentives with what you would like to achieve as well. So,
okay. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Patrick. I am someone who is just starting out with DevOps, if I might say. But from my perspective, what I see while trying to learn things is that there are a plethora of tools, like lots of them. So right now, in my mind, what I think is to become a DevOps engineer, so to quote, I have to learn this. Like, in my daily life in my office, about for half a day I work as a sysadmin, and half a day I get time to explore things. Mm-hmm. And on that, my managers or leads haven't put any restrictions per se. But like whenever I
try to learn things, much more tools come up. Like suppose I want to learn configuration management to automate some of my tasks. There are lots of options, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, all of those. So what will be your advice to guys starting out just like me to keep the focus on the, like, how to view DevOps? Like, how can I say myself that I am sticking to this idea rather than getting to learn these many tools, like building our skills across these many platforms, these many tools and all.
Okay. My advice would probably think about, like, where's your biggest bottleneck? So in the learning of the tool, is it really that you need that tool? And I give you an example. I was doing a data center migration, and we had to wait for the network switches to arrive, and they would only arrive 1 week before the actual migration. And there was a lot of debate on that. Why can't we have like test switches and continue and so on? Oh no, it was actually something else. The switches were there, but the cables were not. And we had for the cabling company. And at a certain point I said, well, just get a long cable. Just get that and connect both. And it's that just enough mentality of not going overboard and having to learn all the tools. A lot of the tools you can just do with Bash. Don't let all the things just shine you. I use Make because it's simple, it's elegant, and it does everything I need. So it's kind of, don't fall in the trap that you need to learn the complexity of the tools because it will take sometimes a steep learning curve. Spend time learning about your problem, and then pick the simplest tool to overcome your bottleneck and move to the others. And don't go too far in the spectrum of having to understand everything yourself. So it's hard because you don't know what the balance is, but keep in mind like how simple can I do things. Like I'm not saying this is maybe the best virtue, but the laziness of the sysadmin is not about being lazy. It's just doing the effort that is needed and not go overboard of doing things and tooling. So who knows, in a year you will tell me whether you succeeded. So.
Okay, we'll be taking the last question.
Good morning, Pat. This is Ravi here. Coming back to the statement on DevOps is dead, I somewhat agree with you. So, because we are seeing the new jargons like DevBizOps, DevTestOps, DevSecOps. So, are you saying that we have to look at this new jargons or new way of working?
Well, when I say DevOps is dead, is that I think it will be really hard to reframe it in the industry beyond the part that we collectively currently think what it is. But it doesn't mean it's not important to do that anymore. But all the things that will now happen beyond it are not substituting DevOps. They're just building on it. And so that it will stay important, but let's say collectively it's been embedded, just like Agile and Scrum has been embedded over the years. And that's why I think it's, as a concept, we can try to bolt on new things, sure, probably maybe with some related names for now, but something new will emerge on building on that steps. And I try to show you some examples of links with HR, links with finance and so on. So this kind of connections or pipelines to other parts will start growing. But I think it will be really hard to keep them under the umbrella per se of DevOps. Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot, Patric. Thanks a lot. Please give a big round of applause to Patric for this. So we will break for the tea now. So if you ask me what I learned from this today, so don't fall into toolishness. Less is enough. Less is more. And make sure that DevOps is not about tools, and it's about culture and people. So continuing that spirit. Please go out. Don't hang out with the people you know already. Please meet new people around. See what you do. We have a bunch of sponsors. Without them, this won't be possible. So please go visit their booths, else they'll complain to us that nobody came. So please spend time with them, and so that we can have them next year as well paying for you. Thank you.